Air Transat Flight 236 was flying from Toronto to Lisbon. It was the middle of the night, and the plane was cruising over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean at an altitude of 39,000 feet. This is a situation pilots face every day, and there was nothing abnormal about it. But there was one thing on the plane that was about to change the entire situation in just a few moments. Here, it's worth noting that at an altitude of 39,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, there is no land in sight for thousands of miles. That was when the captain suddenly realized the plane was about to run out of fuel. For both pilots, this was a terrifying situation, because running out of fuel over the Atlantic Ocean means only one thing: certain death. Welcome back to ALjEM TV. This incident occurred on August 23, 2001, at Toronto Pearson Airport. An Air Transat Airbus A330 was being prepared for a flight to Lisbon. It was intended to be a 7-hour non-stop flight, so 48 metric tons of fuel were loaded. Following preparations, boarding began. At that time, it was 9:00 p.m. local time. There were 293 passengers and 13 crew members on board, including 2 pilots. The flight captain was 48-year-old Robert Piché, who had 16,000 hours of flight experience. The first officer, 28-year-old Dirk de Jager, had 5,000 hours of experience, 400 of which were in this specific aircraft, the Airbus A330. Regarding the aircraft, it was a state-of-the-art Airbus A330 model that was only 2 years old. All in all, there was no lack of experience in the pilots, and there were no faults with the plane. After completing all flight checks, the pilots took the plane to the runway and, with permission from ATC, took off. After takeoff, the pilots turned the plane toward Lisbon, across the Atlantic Ocean. Within minutes, the plane reached its cruising altitude of 39,000 feet. On long flights like this, the pilots don't have much to do because the autopilot system handles most of the work. The pilots only monitor the situation and keep the control tower updated on their location and status. 4 hours had passed since the takeoff of Flight 236. Everything was normal, and most of the passengers were asleep. The plane had reached the exact center of the Atlantic Ocean, and that was the moment when a problem occurred. At 1:00 a.m. Canada time, the pilots noticed an abnormal reading on engine number 2. The right engine. The oil pressure was showing high, the oil quantity was low, and the oil temperature was also indicating low. The pilots were seeing this type of error for the first time in their careers. They immediately opened the flight manual to try to understand this strange error. Normally, when a plane is operating, the oil temperature rises over time, but here it was indicating a low temperature, which was not normal in any way. They could not find information about this error in the flight manual. The pilots contacted the maintenance unit in Canada and informed them. Unfortunately, the maintenance unit didn't know about this error either. They told the pilots to keep monitoring it and that they would contact them again later. Even though the right engine was showing a faulty oil reading, there was no problem with the flight itself. The pilots relaxed, thinking it might be a faulty sensor providing incorrect oil readings. But half an hour later, another advisory message appeared in front of the captain. This message was not related to oil, but to fuel. Commercial airline fuel is distributed equally in the wings, and it was noticed that Flight 236 did not have the same amount of fuel in both wings. The quantity of fuel in the right wing was less than the left. Normally, this problem isn't that serious because it can be fixed during the flight. The captain opened the cross-feed valve, which allowed fuel to flow from the left wing to the right wing, and within minutes, the fuel quantities in both wings were equalized. Only 10 minutes had passed when the captain started seeing a low fuel warning. This was a problem no pilot wants to face, especially in a plane full of passengers. The pilot saw that the fuel in the right wing had decreased again, and now there wasn't enough fuel in both wings combined to reach Lisbon. This time, the matter had become serious. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there weren't many options to divert the plane. In reality, they had only one option: the Azores Islands. These islands are part of Portuguese territory in the Atlantic Ocean, where an airport is located on the island of Terceira. The captain immediately contacted ATC and informed them that they were going to land at that airport due to a fuel shortage. However, the pilots weren't even sure if they would make it to the airport or if they would have to land in the ocean. At that time, the plane had 7 tons of fuel left, about 7,000 kilograms. While it seems like a lot, it was actually only 6% of the A330's fuel capacity, and it was decreasing very rapidly. But the question is, why was the fuel decreasing? Was it another faulty sensor, or was there really a fuel shortage? A decrease in fuel is only possible if fuel is leaking from somewhere. To figure this out, The captain instructed the flight crew to monitor the wing's trailing edge, the back part of the wing. If fuel were leaking, there would surely be an indication. But due to the darkness, the crew couldn't see any indication. Now, the condition was that 1 ton of fuel was disappearing every 5 minutes. The captain realized that fuel was definitely leaking from somewhere. They only had 25 minutes of fuel left, which meant reaching the airport was impossible. During this time, the captain and first officer were in constant contact with the maintenance unit and ATC. The maintenance unit instructed the captain to drop the plane from 39,000 to 20,000 feet to confirm the fuel leak. The pilot refused, as they believed that even if the fuel leak were confirmed, it wouldn't be possible to bring the plane back up. At the very least, they still had the option of gliding from 39,000 feet. In the next few minutes, all doubts were cleared when a fire broke out in the plane's right engine. Seeing this, chaos erupted in the plane, and the passengers who were sleeping peacefully were now filled with fear. The plane now had 5 tons of fuel and only 1 engine left. It wasn't possible for the plane to cruise on just 1 engine, so the altitude began to drop slowly. Meanwhile, an emergency was declared at Terceira Airport. Fire trucks and the emergency crew began their preparations to deal with any situation. The plane, still 240 kilometers from Terceira Airport, now had only 600 kilograms of fuel left. Then, exactly what was feared happened. The left engine burned out from running at full thrust, and now Flight 236 began gliding over the Atlantic Ocean without any engines. Here, the captain's decision not to drop the plane to 20,000 feet proved to be correct. Because both engines were shut off, the plane was plunged into darkness, as the engines also power the plane's electrical system. Fortunately, the plane's ram air turbine, RAT, deployed, which generates just enough electricity from the airspeed to keep the cockpit's essential instruments running. Now, Terceira Airport was 120 kilometers away. The plane had dropped to 30,000 feet, and the captain had to cover this distance just by gliding. The darkness and pin-drop silence in the passenger cabin created an atmosphere of terror, a silence that perhaps signaled some disaster. The worst-case scenario was that if the plane couldn't reach the airport, it would have to land in the ocean. For this reason, the crew began preparing the passengers for a water landing. Landing in the ocean is dangerous in every way, because even if the passengers survive the impact, they could drown. Or if they don't drown, they could die of hypothermia due to the cold water. Normally, it is very difficult to fly a passenger plane without engines. Everything was dependent on the pitch control, which the pilots were managing with manual sticks. The altitude was dropping at a rate of 2,000 feet per minute, meaning in the next 15 minutes, the plane would either reach the airport or, when the plane's distance from Terceira Airport was 15 kilometers, its altitude was 13,000 feet. Normally, at that distance, the altitude should be 3,000 feet. Now, if the pilot had nosedived to reduce altitude, the plane's speed would become too fast. And in that situation, the chances of a crash landing are very high. Therefore, the pilot had the plane perform a 360-degree turn. When this turn was completed, the distance to the airport was the same, but the altitude had dropped to 5,000 feet. This altitude was still high, but not high enough to perform another 360-degree turn. Therefore, the pilot aligned the plane with the runway and performed a few S-turns. Because of the S-turns, the distance of the plane from the runway increased further, and it got more time to reduce altitude. Under normal conditions, flaps are kept open during landing, which creates drag, and engine thrust is increased, which keeps the plane's nose up. But Flight 236 had no engine thrust, so this landing was very different and very dangerous. The pilots had only one chance to land the plane. It was do or die. Finally, the plane hit the runway with a loud jolt, and 8 out of 12 tires burst. There was some difficulty in stopping the plane, but finally, it skidded to a halt. As soon as the plane stopped, a fire broke out in the landing gear, which the airport crew immediately brought under control. Flight 236 became the first and last passenger plane in aviation history to set a record for the longest time spent gliding without engines. Regarding the fuel leak in the right engine, the investigation revealed that before takeoff in Toronto, the maintenance crew had replaced an engine part, but it was from a different plane. Because of the mismatched fitting, it caused vibrations, which burst the nearby fuel line. After this incident, Airbus installed a new system so that in the future, Pilots would be alerted to fuel leaks during a flight. 1 year later, Captain Robert Piché and First Officer Dirk de Jager were honored with the Superior Airmanship Award for performing a dead-stick landing on an Airbus A330. I hope you will like and share this video from ALjEM TV. Thank you very much for your lovely comments. See you in the next great video.